Hey everybody, Greg Pruitt here, president of the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance, and this is the latest episode of Guns with Greg. And today I'm joined by my good friend and fellow gun rights activist, Don Kilmer. How are you today, sir?
Doing well.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking. I know you're a really busy man doing helping gun owners and others throughout the state of Idaho and really throughout the country. I wanted to talk about various things today. We're going to talk about the NFA and the lawsuit against the NFA from multiple gun rights organizations. We wanted to talk about this case of medical marijuana and the Second Amendment, how that maybe all works together. And before we talk about those two cases that I know Second Amendment Foundation and others are a part of, I want to talk about this debate that we're having right now in this country regarding whether or not transgender people should be able to own firearms. This is I know you're on Twitter or X, because I see your commentary and stuff, but this is a firestorm right now. And there's this allegation that the DOJ, and I'm saying allegation because some people are saying they think it's not real, some people are saying it is, but either way, there's been calls from the right to say that transgender people just shouldn't be able to own guns because they're mentally ill or whatever. And so I figured we could kick off this episode talking about that particular issue. I happen to be in the camp of no, Thomas Jefferson said, no free man shall ever be debarred the use of arms. If you haven't committed some sort of crime or you haven't even been mentally adjudicated through this whole other process, then why are we just going to ban guns from an entire class of people? That seems really dangerous, slippery slope type stuff. So that's my perspective. What about yours?
Yeah, well, let's try and set the table here. Within any presidential administration, there are the political people who have the pulse of the zeitgeist, and and as you mentioned, it's a hot issue and everybody's talking about it on Twitter and Facebook and social media. So the political people in an administration are going to want to try and exploit that for the advantage of the person they work for, in this case, Donald Trump. And then there are the professional people who are both appointed and career civil service, who work in the Department of Justice. They might work in the Solicitor General's office. That's the office that argues cases to the U.S. Supreme Court. There's a Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. We know Harmeet Dillon is the head of that right now. And they're the people who are lawyers and scholars and people who study these issues and presumably understand the Constitution and the case law. And sometimes there are conflicting messages that get out there. Yeah. The political people want to strike while the iron's hot, and they may get out ahead of the professional people who actually know the law. And my understanding is that the Trump administration is already trying to walk this back because they've probably gotten some good advice from their lawyers that there's lots of due process problems here. You're setting a dangerous precedent. I mean, right now, the people who can be categorically debarred from firearm possession or buying a gun, it's a very limited list. And yeah. I mean, it's for instance, if you've been dishonorably discharged from the military, if you've renounced your citizenship, if you're a convicted felon. Included in that list is if you have been, and key word here, adjudicated mentally defective or with a mental illness, and again, another qualifier, such that you're a danger to yourself or others. Not everybody with an anomaly in the way they think and relate to other human beings is a psychopath or a sociopath or is in fact mentally ill. There are people that we all have in our families who are a little bit eccentric or a little bit odd. They lock their doors 3 times, or they're obsessive compulsive about looking for things and checking for things, or They're constantly straightening pictures in their house or something. I mean, these are odd little quirks that we all kind of roll our eyes at and go, okay, Aunt Pity Pat's a little bit off, but she's not dangerous. There's no reason
Yeah.
she shouldn't have the right to defend herself if somebody invades her home. So this issue of transgender disqualification is a subcategory at best of, is the person sufficiently mentally ill that they're a danger to themselves or others? Because just wearing a dress or thinking that you were born in the wrong body, or if you've actually been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, which is a very rare diagnosis anyway, that's not the issue. The issue is, has there been an individualized finding that you're a danger to yourself or others? The categorical disqualification of somebody who's, for instance, been dishonorably discharged from the military or a convicted felon, that's because there's been an adjudication. Okay, there has been a finding that you can't be trusted with the attributes of being a citizen, which includes, by the way, the right to keep and bear arms, the right to vote, the right to hold public office, the right to sit on a jury. To strip those from somebody, there has to be evidence. There has to be notice and an opportunity to be heard. There has to be the right to confront your witnesses, to present your own evidence. These are what we call, these are a bundle of what we call in civil rights litigation due process rights. Okay, so and you can kind of flip that. Well, what process is due before the government deprives you of life, liberty, property? And in this instance, the right to keep and bear arms is a liberty interest. So before the government can deprive you of your life, a death sentence, criminal offense, there has to be full due process. Government's got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you committed an enumerated crime and that there were aggravating circumstances and no mitigating circumstances, and therefore you're going to face the hangman if you're found guilty. If the government's going to deprive you of property, fine you, it's the same thing. There have to be those protections and guarantees in place. And if the government's going to deprive you of a liberty interest, the right to vote, the right to sit on a jury, the right to hold public office, the right to keep and bear arms, the right to speak, the right to own a gun, there has to be a process for stripping you of those rights. And what we do in the civil rights business as lawyers is we make sure that the government crosses the T's and dots the I's, and just labeling somebody transgender is not sufficient.
Yeah, well, and you know this just from the cultural perspective. You mentioned earlier, real gender dysphoria is extremely rare, right? There's very few people, but because the left has propagated this crap into our schools, into the media, into TV shows, and all this stuff, the amount of people who say they are transgender has exploded, right? Way beyond what it really is. And so what I was trying to tell some people is, look, a lot of this is just social contagion, right? Oh, it's cool to be transgender. And so there's not a real gender dysmorphia. It's just somebody who's doing something to, fit in.
Yeah.
I said, so you can't even really say that everybody that's identifying as transgender right now is mentally ill. Some of them are just following the leftist propaganda because they want attention, versus somebody who really, maybe their brain is just, really jacked up and they really think they are in the wrong body. Those types of people, I don't think there was one single person in my high school that at least openly identified in that way, in any way, shape, or form. It was unheard of, and now everywhere you go, like 25% of the people identify that way. And so I said, you got to be really careful about just saying, well, transgender people are mentally ill, now we got to go ahead and do this, because where does that stop?
Well, and I've done quite a bit of litigation on the intersection between Second Amendment rights and mental illness. I got a case pending right now in the Southern District of Texas that's dealing with this issue. A finding of mental illness is not the same thing as a finding of dangerousness.
Correct.
Okay. The problem is that there is a kind of a prejudice in society for people who do have diagnosed mental illness. And it's because we don't understand mental illness. We're afraid of it. We don't know what it is. But I mean, the reason we have these due process rights is we want to say that every soldier coming back from war who's experienced the horrors of seeing dead bodies, their friends killed, and the horrors of war, a certain percentage of them, maybe even a majority of them, are going to suffer from what we used to call battle fatigue, and now we call it PTSD or delayed stress syndrome, that sort of thing. These things are recoverable. That with proper treatment, they can become healthy again. The idea that we should be telling returning categorically all returning vets are not allowed to exercise their Second Amendment rights until they've gone through psychiatric treatment or something is nonsense. There is a presumption in Anglo-American law. There is a presumption of sanity for every person, and it is the government's burden to prove that somebody is suffering from a mental disease or defect that would prevent them from exercising the judgment necessary to own a firearm or to vote or hold public office. And that burden should be very high, and it should be the government's burden. And we should have a path for people who can be cured to come to regain their rights. So this idea of, we're just going to, anybody who self-declares as transgender automatically loses their gun rights is a path we don't want to go down.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a veteran, and I knew, especially during the Obama era, I remember a lot of veterans didn't want to go get help for their PTSD because they were afraid of losing their gun rights. They didn't want to go see doctors. They didn't want to go tell the VA what was happening. And these weren't guys that I knew personally that they weren't a danger to themselves or anyone else. They just, like you said, there was stuff from war that they didn't want to talk about and were afraid to go and say, hey, I'm having nightmares, right? That's nightmares from the war can qualify you for PTSD for a disability,
right?
And with the VA, and they didn't want to do it because they were afraid that the VA was going to come after guns, and they've done that to people before. And
the odd thing is that most people will be able to work through that either with the help of family or their support group, or with the help of a doctor, and seek confidential treatment for that. But the problem is that there's going to be a certain percentage of those who maybe are broken and do need intensive treatment, and because they're afraid of losing their rights, they won't get the help they need.
Yeah,
and then they either hurt somebody else or they eat a bullet themselves, and that's not. We don't want that either.
Yeah, correct. Yeah,
we need to remove that. The other problem here with this transgender Second Amendment zeitgeist going on now is that we need to remove the stigma of mental illness. Okay, I'm not saying everybody who's transgender is mentally ill. Okay, in fact, I don't really care, what your genitalia is or what you wear when you're out in public. Okay, but if you are a danger to yourself or others, that's going to manifest itself regardless of what you're wearing, or if you've got makeup on or something. I mean, that's the issue. Is there an individualized showing that the person is a danger to themselves or others, and therefore we should either curb or suspend their rights until we find out what's going on. And that's what most mental health laws do. Is they try and there's an incident where somebody makes what's called a suicide gesture. They're under a lot of stress, a lot of bad things happen in their life, and they say or do something that looks like they're engaged in self-harm. So what the law does is says, okay, well, we're going to place you into observation so we can find out what's going on here. Were you just having a bad day, or are you close to the breaking point? That's probably a fair thing for the government to do. But the law is very specific. There has to be an adjudication of mental illness before you can strip somebody of their rights. not just a, hey, we placed you under observation because a police officer found you in distress for 72 hours. The federal law does not allow stripping gun rights from people just for mere observation. Okay.
Yeah.
There has to be a court hearing with full due process rights and a finding, presumably by clear and convincing evidence, that the person is a danger to themselves or others. And the federal law, at least, which is what I'm familiar with, allows for you to go back to court and say, okay, well, I've been through 2 or 3 years of treatment and I'm fine now. And again, the government bears the burden to prove that you're not fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I guess I want to go back on something you said here and touch briefly on this. So the crux of what a lot of this is happening, obviously this is a lot of this discussion comes after the tragedy in Minnesota, right, where a transgender person went and shot up a church that he used to attend. And there's been a string, right? There's been a string of transgender, or people who identify as transgender, I should say, that have done some really bad, horrible stuff lately. And that's where this call is coming from. But I said, what I was trying to tell people is, guys, go back before this new trend has started. And it's a bunch of other people who have, look, in my mind, if you're going and shooting or stabbing people like this, you're mentally ill. There's something wrong with you, right? Sure. Like, so whatever that mental illness is, right now they're blaming it on transgender, and that's fine to say, maybe there's something with what, but to me, honestly, if I'm going to be on it, the real issues to me seems to be a lot of things. Number one, we don't care about life anymore. We don't care about God, but what is in the medicine that we are giving these people? Because I've talked to, like, Senator Christy Zitto, for instance, has an individual who was on a lot of these SSRI drugs, and that person told her, there was voices in my head all the time telling me to do these horrible things, and I was completely different. I was not who I was when I was on these drugs. And so to me, if we're going to launch an investigation or look at something, maybe it should be into the medicine. Because almost all of these mass shootings, you end up finding out later on, these people are hopped up on some sort of medication legally prescribed to them by a doctor. It's not even illegal drugs. It's medication that we're giving these people. What the hell is happening? How is there not a massive outcry to go, what are we putting in these drugs that these people think that this is okay? I don't know.
I think your point's well taken, Greg, too, because these are complex issues. I'm not a doctor or a psychiatrist. I'm a lawyer, okay? I don't understand biomedical interaction between drugs and the human brain either. I do know that in the history, we used to take people who had a troubled past and lobotomize them. We would actually stick needles, through their eye sockets and scramble their frontal cortex until they were basically vegetables. That's not humane, and we don't do that anymore.
Right.
We used to use leeches to draw blood and quote unquote evil spirits out of people a long time ago. So part of the problem is that there's this hubris of people, sometimes mostly people who want to tell other people how to live their lives. There's this hubris of, the science is settled. We saw this with COVID too. The science is settled, and this is what we know about this medical or health phenomenon. And now here's the public policy for it. Well, that we need to be very careful about attaching public policies and laws to medical fads. Okay, because until the science really is settled, and by the way, if you say something like the science is settled, you're not talking science either. Okay, science is always evolving, always making new discoveries. We may find out 50 years from now that these SSRI drugs were actually the cause of a lot of problems, and that perhaps we shouldn't have been administering them. But to give due, a lot of people with good faith and good intentions are exploring these pharmacological cures. We shouldn't assume that they're evil. They're doing the best with the information they have, but they may not have all the information.
Well, and Don, I mean, I guess to your point too, it's almost like the video game. Remember when it was like, oh, it's the violent video games that are causing this, and I guess if I'm going to play devil's advocate to myself, it's, hey, there's people on SSRIs who don't go out and commit mass shootings because there's a lot of people on SSRI type drugs. I'm still very weary of that stuff. But that being said, I don't think there's any one thing to blame necessarily. Again, I think we've devalued life. The left has devalued life so much. Killing babies is totally fine. Everyone that's out, you could blame the media in part to say, well, look, if they're and some of these leftist politicians that have said, if you're a transgender, the right is out to get you. They're trying to kill you, and so you get into this thing where, well, I have to defend myself, and in order to do that, I have to go out and kill some people, right? I mean, so there's a lot of, I think, variables that have created this situation where we just don't value life. But at the end of the day, to me, we got to get rid of gun-free zones. They're completely ineffective. I don't know how much difference this one would have made, because it's one of the first shootings I'm aware of where it was from outside the building, just through a window. Yeah. So that was, maybe that doesn't make a huge impact there, but I mean, there's so many factors at play here overall.
Well, I mean, but also the problem with the gun-free zone issue, we can take a quick detour there. The problem with the gun-free zone issue is it's almost like some, that there's no such thing as a magic law. Okay, banning something doesn't mean people are not going to try and obtain the items. We know this from prohibition. We know this from drug laws, and we know this even from firearms laws. So perhaps the solution is that churches and schools should have better security.
Yeah.
I mean, we spend millions of dollars making sure that that banks and other places where we store valuable goods are hardened. But we spend no money on the most precious objects we have, our children, our grandchildren, and our fellow congregates, to make sure that they're safe. There are quite a few churches that employ expert help, oftentimes retired or active duty police officers, to make sure that their churches and schools have proper surveillance, perhaps a plan for armed response if somebody is going to try and harm somebody on the property. That to me makes more sense than waving a magic wand and say, well, we're just going to declare this a gun-free zone.
Yeah. And I've told people there's no easy fix to this problem, right? No. Everybody wants the easy solution. The left wants to ban guns. The right is like, well, maybe we just ban certain people, I guess, from owning guns. But at the end of the day, to me, this is a deeply rooted problem in our country. Again, we've devalued life, we've kicked God out of everything, which is always a recipe for disaster when you do that. We've created these gun-free zones. I mean, there's so many factors that come into play. So there's not an easy solution from either side. And to me, it's going to be possibly a decade in the making. But as far as attacking the current trend, I think we have to stop pushing this transgender ideology into everything, especially into our schools. And that may help to some extent. But again, there was lots of mass shootings. We'll say lots, but I mean, there were still plenty of mass shootings, unfortunately, before the transgender trend started. So
the other thing, if I'm allowed to put on a tinfoil hat for a minute here, not to sound too conspiratorial, but if I was on the left and in favor of gun control, and I could promote an issue that would get not deep thinkers, which is my way of saying dumb, people on the right to start accepting the idea that we should ban categories of people from having guns without any kind of court process, and I was a man of the left, I would be stoking the fire of transgender people shouldn't have guns. It's like, well then when the administration changes and new people are in power, it's going to be anybody flying a Gadsden flag can't have a gun.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, not only that, but if I'm the left and if I'm the gun control groups, and this is where I think we're getting dangerously close to people on the right pushing red flag laws, because, well, yeah, that makes sense. Oh, well, we do want to have some due process but you know what? We should just be able to investigate them. Well, there's a law that allows you to investigate them without actually. We could take their guns without, they'll go to court and they'll have a. So that's where I'm just going, guys. Can you not see they're setting you up to want to push red flag laws? Like at the end of the day, a congressional one, possibly. They've been trying to do that for a number of years, but we're getting dangerously close to people on the right pushing red flag laws, and we don't need that.
The red flag laws, there's a lot to criticize on red flag laws, but let me tell you, as somebody who litigated mental health and family law cases, I'll just use the most typical example, but obviously it applies to both sexes. But if you take a man and you tell him he can't go home, we're confiscating his weapons, you can't see your kids, your wife is accusing you of being a monster, and let's assume for a second that he's innocent. If I take that man as a client and take him to court, 5 days after he's had all this happen to him, you can't see your kids, you can't go home, your bank accounts are locked, and your partner in life is accusing you of a horrible crime, he's not going to present well as a witness. Him having a trial or a hearing in that state of mind, are you really surprised that a judge says, yeah, I'm going to grant the restraining order? He's not going to present well.
Yeah.
It takes a person of incredible fortitude to swallow all that happening to them. And presumably there is something wrong in the marriage. There's maybe a lot of maybe there's financial stress, or the kids are acting up or something like that. There's just no way to expect people. We used to have a saying in court that criminal cases were bad people on their best behavior at trial, whereas a family law case or a restraining order case were good people in their worst possible state of mind being presented to the court. So people need to be careful. We need to be awfully careful when we start trying to set up what are basically collectivist principles and saying that, well, we're just going to say this group is not entitled to due process.
Yeah.
That group always gets bigger.
Yeah, that's what I've been telling people. Don't give the government that little bit, and oh boy, when the left is in power and they have a trifecta control, guess what? They're going to double down. They're going to make it much worse, right? Yeah. And then we're going to come back next time and we're going to make it. It's just so you don't want to give the government the ability to do that, in my opinion.
And this issue is related to that. I mean, we can make a transition here to the medical marijuana cases.
That's what I was going to do. So yeah,
because again, it comes down to what categories and attributes are you going to use to adjudicate a case. And look, we don't say that if you enjoy a cocktail every night when you come home from work, that makes you an alcoholic and therefore, ineligible to own a firearm. Some people use alcohol responsibly to celebrate or for sacrament, if that's part of your religion, and some people abuse it, and when you want to start spouting statistics, more people die from alcohol misuse in this country than firearm misuse. Driving drunk, operating a vehicle when you're impaired. So the medical marijuana issue again is a mental health issue. Just the fact that you use marijuana is probably not a sufficient category or classification to say no firearms for you. The question is whether you're misusing it and misusing in a way that's dangerous. Mm-hmm. Again, I don't have any expertise in pharmacology. I know that the current strains of marijuana that are available commercially today, we don't have that problem in Idaho because I think we're the only state left in the country that doesn't authorize even medical use of marijuana. I'm always laughing because I'm 20 minutes from the Oregon border where I live here in Idaho, and and there's all those cheap hotels just across the border in Oregon. I think those are people from Idaho sleeping off their medical marijuana use before they come back here. But I think that the current lawsuit, I'm not involved in that lawsuit that SAF has filed, but I think from what I gather in reading the complaints and reading the stories about the case, is they're attempting to get marijuana use classified as the same as alcohol, that the government has to prove misuse or abuse of the mind-altering substance in order to disqualify somebody from having a firearm. And alcoholism is not per se a disqualifier for owning a firearm. Alcoholism that interferes with your life, major life functions in such a way that you're mentally ill because of your alcohol abuse, that would qualify, assuming you're a danger to yourself or others. And if you're handling firearms, if you're operating a motor vehicle while you're drunk with whiskey, then you're just as much of a danger if you're operating a vehicle or handling a firearm, because you're doing so under the influence of marijuana. So these intoxicants should be treated in roughly similar ways.
Yeah, and that's I look, I don't care to ever use marijuana. It's never been a thing that's been a temptation for me, so to speak. But to me, again, I've always told people, if you're taking anything, whether, like you said, it's alcohol, whether it's marijuana, which again you can't do legally here in Idaho, or whether it's a medication that alters your mind sufficiently that you don't have full control of it. Again, I told you I'm a veteran. My back is all jacked up from Iraq. I've been issued medically, legally, hydrocodone, oxycodone, and fentanyl patches, for my back, and all of that stuff helps the pain in various ways. But when I'm on those types of medication, my firearm is locked up, put away, because I want to be a responsible gun owner. And I know there are millions and millions of gun owners just like me who probably in states where medical marijuana is legal do the same thing I do. Hey, I'm going to take this medical marijuana in whatever form it is, and I'm going to lock away my firearm, and I'm going to do that. But I should be banned from owning a gun or purchasing a firearm because I'm a responsible gun owner and I've done nothing wrong. No, to me, it's be a responsible gun owner, whether it's alcohol, a legal drug that you're allowed to take, or medical marijuana, whatever it is. Just be responsible, put it away, lock it up, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So, okay. So the last topic I wanted to get into was the NFA. The NFA, I think both of us probably agree, should have never been implemented in the first place. It's stupid. And there was a lot of debate about the big, beautiful bill. And I know that there was attempts by some good Republicans to try and just get the NFA completely abolished through the big, beautiful bill. That didn't happen. And the only thing they ended up doing was reducing the tax down to zero. There was even some debate about that, on whether or not that was a good idea, because if we reduce the tax to zero now, which is fine, it's not really the $200 that's the big sticking point. I think for most gun owners, it's that they have to register the stupid stamp in the first place. But there's concern that it may come back. Like if the lawsuit right now that so many gun owners are hoping will go through and get rid of this NFA completely, I guess my concern is that the tax may end up coming back. The Democrats, if they get full control at some point and this tax is still there, they're just going to up it to like $2,000, and then you are going to be legitimately screwed. At that point. So
the $200 tax has never been the problem. That's our friends and colleagues who shoot machine guns for pleasure and hobby shooters, they go through $200 worth of ammo in 15 minutes. Okay,
right.
So it's not there. It's an expensive hobby, but it's not the $200 tax. Little history. Of course, the NFA was proposed in the 1930s. It was an attempt to try and deal with the gangsterism that this is all linked. Okay, when the government tries to ban something, they find that they have to keep banning things keep making more and more things illegal in order to attack the central problem. So, of course, the 18th Amendment banned the sale of alcohol in the country, so that brought in prohibition. Well, all that did was create a huge profit margin for the people who were willing to risk prison in order to supply people with alcohol. And of course, these quote unquote businessmen gangsters needed to protect their markets from other businessmen gangsters. And so they were using the weapons of the day in order to do that. So Thompson machine guns, sawed-off shotguns and short-barreled rifles were also used because they were concealable. But so the original NFA was an attempt at backdooring gun control.
Yeah.
By the way, at the same time, there were efforts to try and actually ban handguns. And that was thankfully stopped. There actually were debates in Congress at the time that the NFA was being considered that said, look, hey, these are arms. They're protected. The Second Amendment says we can't ban them. And so that was why there was a decision to shift the mechanism of control from banning them outright to taxing them and then punishing the non-payment of the tax. Yeah. So again, it was the government trying to do an end run around a constitutional right and a constitutional amendment, but using the tax code rather than banning something outright. And of course, then we ended up with the NFA from the 1930s, which was essentially a tax. And of course, $200 tax on a single firearm at the time was prohibitive. Yeah, especially when you could buy the gun for $50. Now, of course, the guns cost $14,000, but that's also due to market forces of restricting the supply. So and demand will increase the price, and once you've restricted the supply, so $14,000 machine guns, you pay a $200 tax on them. The $200 tax is not stopping somebody from buying the gun. Of course, the NFA regulatory scheme was, well, we're imposing a tax on this item, and therefore we have to register the firearm, know where it is at all times in order to make sure that the tax is actually being paid. So this was the rationale for it being a dual regulatory scheme of imposing a tax and imposing a registration scheme. Well, when the big beautiful bill came along and they decided to reduce the tax on NFA items to zero, from $200 to zero, then that basically deprived the law of the rationale for having a registration scheme. And as we know, the current federal law prohibits the federal government, not state governments, we'll get into that a little bit too, prohibits the federal government from maintaining a registration scheme for non-NFA firearms. So your common variety handgun, your common variety rifle, a pistol, shotgun, it is illegal for the federal government to maintain a registration database of those. Now, there is a tax when you buy a gun from a retailer. Okay, and it's a tax that's designed to try and preserve hunting grounds and conservation of land. Yeah. So it's not specifically related to firearms as firearms per se. It's basically a revenue scheme to try and preserve open lands and hunting, and the tax has even been extended from firearms to bows and arrows too. So it is, to the extent that any tax is legitimate, it's a legitimate tax to try and address a government good, a common good. But the NFA tax is a specific tax on firearms per se as firearms. So the current lawsuit that was being filed is, as the theory of the case goes like this. Well, if the tax is zero and the only reason you needed a registration scheme was to collect the tax, then you don't need the registration scheme anymore either. So if that case is successful in knocking out the registration scheme, that would be, if there is a change in the government and anti-gun politicians gain power again at the ballot box, they would have to bootstrap an entirely new registration and tax scheme. And the danger there is, of course, that they would want to then include everything and not just NFA guns. So, yeah, the better solution would be to completely repeal the NFA.
Yeah.
Or if you're going to have some kind of national weapons control for true weapons of war, where you want to say, well, we don't want individuals owning nuclear weapons or anti-tank, missiles or something, then raise the bar to that. But it's clear that machine guns and short-barreled shotguns and short-barreled rifles fit the definition of arms under the Second Amendment as it was understood at the time. I mean, even cannons were considered arms at the time. They were protected because merchant shipping boats, people who had sailing vessels that went up and down the coast to transport goods, they had cannons on their ships for self-defense. Defense from pirates and what have you, defense from hostile actors. Because when the United States was at war with Great Britain or France, oftentimes the military ships of England and France would try and attack our merchant vessels, and they would defend themselves with cannons. So, where's the line? I have my own idea of where the line is. But these are clearly arms that are useful for self-defense.
Yeah, I don't want to mess up the number here, but I mean, there is, like you said, we've been pushing a repeal of the NFA for a while. It is 335. I was going to say 35. HR 335. It's Representative Eric Burleson out of Missouri. And Congressman Russ Fulcher is a co-sponsor of that bill, would repeal the NFA in its entirety. Going to be a tough haul. Not going to lie. It's not favorable, especially in the Senate, but you got enough spineless weasel Republicans in Congress too that probably wouldn't go for a full repeal regardless.
Even if the NFA was repealed at the federal level, then the issue then devolves to state governments. And as we know, here in Idaho, we don't have any state laws on NFA weapons other than comply with federal law, whereas states like California severely restrict NFA weapons. I was involved in a case out there in California where an armored car company wanted to use standard military issues M4s, which actually have shorter barrels. And we couldn't get a permit from the California Department of Justice under the dangerous weapons permit statutes there for my client to use basically just short-barreled AR-15s, not full auto, just short, because you want your security guards to have a shorter weapon because they're in an urban environment. They're going into buildings all the time. They want a shorter, more compact weapon to guard the deposits and the valuable, the bonds and precious jewels and stuff that they're transporting. But we couldn't get the state of California to budge just on that issue. We didn't even want full auto. We just wanted a short-barreled rifle, like an M4 or not an M4, but an AR-15 with a 10-inch barrel or something.
What was their justification for denying you?
The only people who get special dispensation is, surprise, surprise, Hollywood and the motion picture industry.
Well, what was their justification for denying you? Did they give you one?
They said that they could use standard rifles with 16-inch barrels and overall length of I think it's 30. There's two issues with regard to rifles and shotguns. There's the overall length of the weapon and then the barrel length of the weapon. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to be able to have these security guards that were transporting valuable material, valuable goods, to be able to have weapons that were convenient for them to use instead of a full-size weapon.
Yeah, makes sense.
And we couldn't convince. We applied for the dangerous weapons permit, which, they looked at us and says, "Well, you're not a motion picture studio, are you?" No. Well, then the answer is no. So then we had to have a hearing, and we had to present testimony and evidence of why these are more convenient. And the hearing officer even said, we granted that it's easier, but we just don't want to set the precedent of anybody other than motion pictures or police departments to have short-barreled rifles. And it makes no sense.
Wow. So they don't even let the cops have them? Or the cops can?
Under California's
law, I was going to say,
for law enforcement and military to have these weapons. So they don't even have to have the special license.
Yeah. So the government in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jeez. Yeah. Well, yeah, like you said, if it ever did get repealed, I mean, it'd be great here in Idaho and some other red states. But yeah, if you're in a blue state or a purple state, you'd probably still be screwed at that point. But interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, any other cases, Don, you think the gun owners should be paying attention to? Anything coming out of SCOTUS anytime soon regarding 2A?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, there are several fully litigated assault weapons cases that are sitting at the Supreme Court on the Supreme Court's docket, and in what's called a petition for certiorari, which we all know that the Supreme Court doesn't have to take every case. So typically the case starts by filing what's called a petition for certiorari, where you're asking the court to review the case from the circuit court. There's a case out of Illinois right now. There's another case out of California that's trailing that. The case out of Illinois was there was a full trial. I think it was a week or a 2-week trial in which expert testimony was taken, percipient witnesses testified, and the trial judge there said, yeah, these are arms and they're protected by the Second Amendment. That case is now pending before the Seventh Circuit. My guess is that will go up to the Supreme Court if there's a loss there. The Seventh Circuit could surprise us and uphold the trial judge. The Seventh Circuit has done that before. For instance, in back when we were litigating even concealed carry, the Seventh Circuit upheld the right to have to a CCW permit without having to show a special need. So it's possible that the Seventh Circuit could uphold the trial court. If not, look for that case to be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. The one thing that we're finding with the gun rights litigation now, a little inside baseball, is we used to take these cases up to the U.S. Supreme Court on a motion for a preliminary injunction, where we're trying to say, the law is irrational, violates the Constitution. We need an injunction now, and then in place, and then we'll fully litigate the case. The Supreme Court seems to be turning away from deciding these big issues on injunctions. They want to see a full record with a fully litigated case with a trial. And a preliminary injunction is usually an early remedy on a case before both sides have had a chance to fully brief cases and call all witnesses. So the Supreme Court seems to be shying away from these preliminary injunctive relief cases. They want to see a fully litigated case with a final injunction so that there's a final judgment before they take the case.
Okay. No, that's interesting. That's good to know, because I do seem to remember years ago it seemed opposite, that we were always trying to get injunctions against these lower courts and all that other kind of stuff. So
we still seek injunctive relief, but there's usually two points in time where you're trying to seek the injunction. There's at the beginning of the case, you're saying this constitutional violation is so bad that we want you to enjoin the law while we litigate the case. And sometimes those preliminary injunctions were what was being litigated up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is kind of shying away from that now and saying, you know what, we'd rather see the case after you've had your full opportunity, and both sides have had an opportunity to litigate all issues.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, Don, I really appreciate you coming on. I think it's always good conversations, and I'm not an attorney, so I always love having you on to talk about gun-related issues and how it may or may not impact gun owners and all that stuff. So, but yeah, no, I appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, if I can plug for a minute, the Second Amendment
absolutely.
Foundation. The Second Amendment Foundation puts on an annual gun rights policy conference every year. It's usually a gathering of the gun rights organizations and the litigators and gun rights activists. It's usually a Friday, a Saturday, and a Sunday. They hold these conferences. This year it's in Salt Lake City. So if you're in the Intermountain West and you want a nice weekend in Salt Lake City, go to the Second Amendment Foundation's website, look up the Gun Rights Policy Conference. It's free to attend. There's no charge. You just have to get your own hotel and transportation to Salt Lake City. And there's usually a lot of side conferences going on that'll take place. I'll be there this year. I think you're going to be there as well.
This will be my first time going, so I'm kind of excited. It's close. It's about 3 hours from me. So
yeah, and they've got some good speakers lined up this year. It's well worth your time and effort to try and attend one of these.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's closer than it's ever been. So
yeah.
You may not get a closer one.
Yeah, they move them around oftentimes. The last one was in San Diego last year. I think the year before that might have been Phoenix. They happen a lot of times in Texas. We've had them in Missouri before, but it's every year. So it's an annual gun rights policy conference. You can Google Second Amendment Foundation, GRPC, and that you should be able to get all the information you need there.
Awesome. All right, Don. Well, I appreciate it. We'll be honored to have you on again sometime soon. I'm sure if we don't do another one with you before the policy conference here in a few weeks, I will see you down there. But thank you everybody for tuning in. We appreciate it. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. Until next time, take care. God bless.